I'm a burn surgeon, which means my days are divided into things on fire and things trying not to be, flesh devoured by heat, fluids poured back like we can argue with physics, skin transported and thin, meshed sheets from somewhere less necessary to somewhere that refuses to be whole. Our unit sits on the 7th floor between your core and the helipad, an L-shaped wing where the air runs hot on purpose, 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so we don't kill people with kindness while we debride them. The corridor smells like warmed chlorhexidine and warm saline and something sweeter that never leaves your clothes no matter how long you stand under the shower, cooked protein. At St. Luke's Burn Center, we deal in percentages and times, percent TBC, hours since injury, ml/kg/HR of urine, 4 times weight times burn percentage over 24 hours, half in the first aid. Then the actual art of looking at a body and deciding which rules belong to it. We talk about depth, superficial, partial, full thickness, because 3rd degree implies a ladder the body can climb down. We know where to cut when skin turns into a stubborn rind, and we know the specific brand of guilt that comes with being relieved when a wound is dry and insensate, because it means we don't have to torture a person with scrubbing the living parts. The first one came in at 2:21 on a Wednesday that had promised boredom. Tone from EMS, adult male, possible thermal injury, estimated TBC, 70%, no obvious fire exposure at scene. I've heard impossible before, radiator burns on both legs that somehow happened in a cold bathtub, scalds that don't match a caregiver's timeline, industrial accidents that look like and are punishments. But the EMT's voice carried a new kind of confusion. He was mid-40s and looked older because pain increases age exponentially. The backboard sheet stuck to him where dermis had become lacquer. No soot at the nares, no singed hair. Clothes intact, shirt fibers not charred, no melted polyester fused to flesh. Full thickness across the torso and proximal arms, the skin blanched, waxy white, insensate and deep partial thickness radiating outward with that raw crimson that screams for morphine. A belt-shaped area of spared skin circled his waist like something had shaded him there. In the deltoid triangle of his left arm, a sharp shadow of a handprint where someone had reached him first and occluded the heat. Witnesses. I asked the medic while I slid a 9 French into the right femoral vein with the kind of speed that looks like grace when you've failed to sleep. We had no time to rummage for peripheral arms that no longer recognized catheters. He was in his kitchen, the medic said. Stove cold. No smoke. He was on the floor, awake. Kept saying the same thing, it's on me. We intubated him because if you wonder whether you should, you should. ABG with lactate 5.2, carboxyhemoglobin 1.8%, room air levels. Cyanide kit negative. The bronchoscope showed tracheal mucosa pink, no soot, no edema. If he'd been in a fire, it hadn't been the kind the textbook claims. Parkland, I said, and someone did the math. For milliliters times weight, 88 kilograms, times percent TBSA, we'd call it, conservatively, 65, equals 22,880 milliliters in 24 hours, half in the first 8 hours. He'd already been out for one. Start at 1,400 milliliters per hour, I told the resident. Titrate to 0.5 milliliters per kilogram per hour urine output. Escharotomy lines got sharpened, medial and lateral arms, 3 lines across the chest to relieve the bowstring. Rangers and farmers call it unzipping. I called it because we'd still had distal Doppler signals, but radial pulses felt nervous. Better to cut before the strangling gets good. In the or we turn the thermostat to August and clamp our gowns closed like we don't notice. The electrocautery smoke usually smells like night at a steakhouse. His didn't. Imagine a hot iron passed over damp linen, that wet heat smell, and then an air after thunder. The tissue we released parted without bleeding and without that angry ooze that reassures. In the margins we found lived dermis, capillaries that blushed. At the center our blade met rind. No cooked cloth adherent. No black, no soot. What's your pain level? I asked him before we pushed propofol, even though full thickness means insensate by definition. He stared at the ceiling like someone checking for leaks. Lip cracked, tongue dry and clean, as if the heat had gone everywhere but the air. It saw me, he whispered, like reporting a plate number. Was it delirium? Yes. Was it also a sentence that sat in my chest like a coin? We sheeted him in silver, the slick of sulfadiazine that soothes residents and pleases no bacteria, xeroform over partial thickness, sulfamylin for the ears because chondritis is a bully, bacitracin for the donor sites we would eventually create. He left us for the hot rooms of the unit, warmed with forced air and warmed with family voices we hadn't yet found. He took up the kind of occupancy that transforms a schedule. He should have been a town rumor, you won't believe, that we tell while making coffee. He wasn't alone for long. 3 hours later, another. A woman in her 30s, runner's body, hair singed exactly nowhere. Full thickness across the anterior thighs and lower abdomen with a perfect spared oval under the waistband and a 2-inch wide spared strip under the blood pressure cuff someone had left on her left arm. Again that weird smell. Again that dryness in the airway when we looked. Where? I asked. In our bedroom, her partner said. The heater's not even on. She fell out of bed screaming. I flipped the lights. Her skin, he pressed a fist to his forehead, gore-averse, but not grief-averse. She said something over and over. What was it? He shook his head. English isn't. We don't go to church. She said, it saw me. By sunrise, 2 more. A college kid with a burn pattern like a negative of light, spared under the phone where it had rested on his chest, spared under the crook of his arm that had curled when it started, spared below the brim of a baseball hat he'd fallen asleep wearing on a dare. An older man from a riverfront bench who reeked of winter and not smoke, circumferential full thickness to both calves like his pant legs had been pure heat and no flame. The ED doctor called me on my cell while we were peeling the first one's chest. Do you know something we don't? He said. I know I need beds, I said. By noon the county burned annex we never opened its double doors and begged for staff. Our unit swung ugly. Filters, lights, the radiators that make the rooms 90 degrees Fahrenheit because hypothermia kills burn patients quieter than infection does. My burn fellow, Harper, texted me a photo from triage for stretchers, for bodies, for similar patterns. Every one of them with spare patches where shadows would be. I called the fire investigator because the word arson lives next to burn in people's minds, and the last thing I needed was a detective lecturing me on accelerants. He came with a measuring wheel and a camera and a face that had no time for ghost stories. He took one look at the patients and said, they didn't do this with gasoline. What did they do it with? I asked, not because I thought he had a word, but because a man like that needs to be asked. Line of sight, he said, eventually. You see it. He waved his hand in the air above the woman in 714. The pattern of destruction had borders like a lampshade throws. Under the lips of a belly fold, spared. Under the arm like a triangle, spared. Under the elastic of a sports bra, spared. No drips. No runs. No char. Just heat. Exposures that made physics proud and policy terrified. You're thinking microwave, I said. You're thinking thieves of copper. I'm thinking I don't know, he said. And that's a sentence I'm allowed to say once in a decade. By the second night, we'd heard the phrase enough times that it qualified as clinical sign. Whispered by mouths already ruined by dryness, written by a teenager on his own thigh because he didn't have the breath, muttered by a woman under ketamine as if describing a god. It saw me. I don't sleep well when the burn unit is full. I do the surgeon's pantomime of closing my eyes for an hour to cheat circadian biology long enough to get a fresh or face. Then I stand in my own kitchen and put a towel in the refrigerator because the house feels too warm. The first dream took its own time and brought its own heat. Operating room 7. I know it because of the scuffed place on the floor where we will bear hugger stands into the same divot. The lights are on but dim. The air is hot because we are not cruel enough to cool a person while cutting them. There's a silhouette next to my table, not a person, because it's an absence of surface and a presence of light, a human geometry drawn in white and the heat that makes iron colors go away. It stands very still. In the dream, my hands are gloved and bloody and useless. The silhouette waits like a polite guest invited into a house by mistake. When I woke, the bedroom thermometer read 80 degrees Fahrenheit and my throat had the scrape feeling of or air too dry from masks, too warmed by other people's heat. I texted Harper, who's on for 19, as if 19 weren't a number that belonged to another story already. He answered with a photo that looked like infrared, the bear hugger's clear hose blushing white where it ran to the patient, and behind it against the glass there was a bright shape like a person on fire. Even though the camera in his phone was ordinary and we had turned off the warmer for the night. Tell me you see it, he wrote. The camera timestamp read 3:11 a.m. We run a protocol that pretends physics plays fair. We don't let mirrors into the unit because when you debride a face, it is cruel to give the person a witness on the wall. Our door windows are safety glass with wire spiderweb in the middle. Still, by the third day, I caught myself noticing angles, the way a patient's spared skin matched the triangle of the bedside rail, the rectangle under the clipboard, the crescent under an orbit from the brim of a hat, the half-moon behind a rolling cart. Line of sight. A fire that uses sight as its accelerant. I told no one the words I used in my head. It sees you and you become heat. I did not like how quickly that felt like explanation. We got a consult from radiation safety because people love the comfort of lead aprons when the word line of sight meets invisible in a sentence. They lugged Geiger counters and fluoroscopy phantoms to the bedsides and waved the wands without enthusiasm. Normal background everywhere. Not ionizing, the physicist said, as if that made it less insulting. Whatever this is, it isn't gamma. We covered all the gloss in my rooms, machine faces, monitors, the little plastic windows that let nurses peek without going in. Beige drapes turned the unit into a low-lit church. It didn't make the numbers stop, not the admissions, not the phrase they said, not the way the wounds lay like maps of light had been laid down and paid for. By the 5th case, I started seeing the same spared shapes across different bodies, like a rubber stamp. Circles from mugs people had lifted like shields, a crosshatch where a wicker chair had kept a man from becoming pure surface. A dog's ear silhouette on someone's chest because its collie had stayed, panicking while its owner cooked. I have never in my life used the word cooked in my head about a human being the way I began to use it in those days. I'm confessing it because someone has to say it for the record. The air itself did it. You're pale, Marla said. You sleep at all? A little, I lied, because a little can mean 3 minutes, and it meant that. The nightmares made geography. Or 7 again, the silhouette again, this time not next to the table, but waiting at the foot, closer to the doors. It didn't move. In the dream, it smelled like the week's patients, that linen and thunder smell. I tried to keep my attention on the field, clamps, debrider, the careful scrape that feels enough like cleaning and is in fact destruction, but my hands would not hold instruments, and my eyes kept skidding back like a tongue to a broken tooth. By the 7th admission, my attending colleagues had abandoned sarcasm and come in person like people visiting a wake. We all stood around a teenager who was alive because he had friends with quick hands and a lot of water. The spared shapes on his chest looked like an octopus, fingers and palms where hands had tried to press him back into the world. His eyeballs were fine because eyelids are good at their job. The lenses would cloud early later if he saw enough ultraviolet without knowing it. We took him to the OR because he could not move his hands with his arms wrapped in hard rind. The escharotomies released a music I will never enjoy again. "Tell me," I said in the room where we pretend to talk families through fairness. His mother looked like women look when they aren't done crying and polite culture demands a halt. "Tell me everything." "He screamed," she said. I thought he was joking. "He yells sometimes when he plays." I went in. He was on the floor next to his desk. The computer screen was on. Lights off. His skin, she put her knuckles in her mouth and bit them like she could gnaw through grief. He kept saying the same thing. We all said it with her under our breath. It saw me. At the Monday morning all hands, a hospital VP asked if our unit was involved in a cluster event. He said it hopefully in the way men who love newsletters say things. I said we were caring for patients with severe thermal injuries of unclear mechanism. I did not use percentages. I did not talk about line of sight with the cafeteria manager 2 doors down. In the afternoon, the CDC called and asked for case definitions. "Full-thickness burns with spared shadows," I said, and then apologized to a public servant who did not deserve my sarcasm. 2 days later, a nurse named Cody brought me a tray with 2 pitchers of saline for the morning's debridement. He set them on the stainless table, and the condensation that collects on cold things in hot rooms did not bead. The metal under the pitchers grew warm, not from the room, but like a small radiator had taken an interest. He stepped back. I put my fingers on the glass. It was not hot, only wrong. "Turn off the lights," I said. He did. The room glowed anyway, the way air glows in dreams when you can see dust you never authorize. In the reflection in the glass door, the one we keep covered with drape because we are not fools, something white stood, familiarity disguised as light. "Doctor," Cody said, "steady and not, do you see it?" "I don't," I said, because sometimes leadership is a lie. We stopped using stainless anywhere we could. We took monitors off arms and put them under blankets. We taped paper over cabinet windows. Our unit looked like a bunker made by people who would rather be kind than clever. The admission slowed because the city had learned to drag its drapes closed. Then they didn't slow, because the thing that sees can find people in cars and on trains and at kitchen tables and in churches with their stained glass. The head of security came to my unit and asked if we'd noticed anything. I told him to call back when his cameras stopped being mirrors. He told me they had, at 3:11 a.m. every night, the feed went white where movement should be. The night I stopped pretending it would leave us alone, I had been in or 7 for 4 hours with a woman whose calves were strangling her feet. Circumferential full thickness, ankle pulses available only to Doppler at the edges. We cut both legs and watched the vessels say thank you by filling. We put mephenide on her ears like icing a cake, because ears have no patience for the romance we use elsewhere. The temperature set high, the Bovies smoke not quite steak. My debrider hummed in my right hand like a child's lie. My left hand rested on the table when not retracting. Something warmed it from below. I looked through the clear drape and saw, just for a second, a white shape standing at the foot of the table. Not a reflection, not a trick, a person shape cut from overexposure. It didn't move. It looked like waiting. The respiratory therapist, Dane on our nights, adjusted the bear hugger, frowned, and then looked at me with a courtesy that was either terror or respect. "We're too hot," he said. I nodded like that was the only crime. After that, the dreams changed. The silhouette wasn't only waiting, it was choosing. It stood closer to the table every time, and the air writhed around it like heat above asphalt. In the dreams, the grass on my tray curled like bacon in a pan, and the staples in my needle driver burned my fingers through the gloves. I tried to be a scientist about it. I measured. I documented. I made graphs in my notebook like a graduate student in a lab with no grants. 3:11 a.m. When it was worst, when the unit's temperature rose without the thermostat's permission, when saline bags warmed faster than the warmer could claim credit, when the vent's humidity readings lied. I asked Perfusion to loan me a laser thermometer. I pointed it at the ceiling over 714th bed at 3:10 and got 84 degrees Fahrenheit. At 3:11, the same spot read 106 degrees Fahrenheit. At 3:12, it fell to 90 degrees Fahrenheit like a guilty thing sitting back down. We learned shielding from oncology. They brought us their lead aprons and the black drapes they use when radiation spills become theater. We hung them over our windows. We made little lead tents over faces when people needed dressing changes at night and we were too tired to be brave. It helped, until it didn't. In a room with blinds closed, drapes hung, lead laid like a roof, a teenage girl cooked under her own bare arm in a triangle that existed because of the angle she held herself. The unit decided it was eyes. We started saying it to each other when no one else was near. Don't look. The thing sees you when you look. I cannot explain to anyone who hasn't been a surgeon how cruel that sentence is to hands trained to look at what they are doing. I tried it once, turned away and debrided by feel, by the gorgeous arrogance of touch. I cut too shallow in 3 places and too deep in 1. She bled, and we put a suture in the place that protested, and I swore in a language people use only when they have used up the others. Our ethics chair called a meeting. He used words like collective trauma and containing the narrative. I told him mine had gone beyond containing. He asked if I was sleeping. I told him I was dreaming of our ore. He nodded like a man who would write a referral to a therapist with a kind smile and good sofa. The dream escalated in its logic. The silhouette now stood by the head of the table, by the anesthesia circuit. Its brightness made the metal seams of the ventilator look newer. It reached toward the ETT like it might pinch the tube to see if it squealed. When I woke, I could smell warmed vinyl and airplane cabin air. Maybe it likes operating rooms, Harper said, late over plastic cups of cafeteria coffee. He is 28 and still calls me sir sometimes because his mouth defaults to polite. It keeps showing up in your Or 7 dream. Maybe that's where it wants to be. I did not ask what it would do there. I said, hush. What I'm going to write now won't make sense unless you've been in our rooms. Unless you've watched muscle burn in air. Unless you've laid down an integradermal matrix and watched it drink. Unless you've stapled mesh to bone. Unless you've played God so many times you forgot who hired you. We were grafting a chest. The donor side on his thigh bled like a field of young corn, all the same and alive and unforgiving. We meshed the split-thickness sheet 1.5:1 on the drum and laid it over the raw truth of his pectorals. We smoothed as if we were assuring a child her hair would lie flat eventually. We tucked it with staples. We said the words because we are sentimental and it helps. Steady. Stay. Take. I felt the heat through my gown before I saw the white. It was like someone had opened a furnace. The graft nearest my left hand curled and shrank like meat. The staples popped free as the collagen gave up. The monitors went crazy for a second, temperature reading 102. 6 degrees Fahrenheit, local EKG noise, and then settled, as if embarrassed. Back lights down, I said. Drapes over the glass. We put a lead apron over the foot of the bed as if it were a blanket. It didn't matter. The white shape brightened at the edge of my vision, and the next graft crinkled like a page on a candle. I did something then not in any manual. I stood and turned to the glass and held up a handheld surgical light like a talisman. The white below me flared as if seen for the first time, and the graft stopped cooking. I didn't like the word that arrived in my head, but I don't get to choose words. It wants to be seen. "Doctor," Dane asked, an entire seminar in that one word. "Turn the bear hugger to low," I said. "Bring me the big light." He rolled the headlight tower from its corner like a fairy tug, swung it toward the foot of the bed, set it to full, and pointed it at himself like a man volunteering for magic. The white shape moved no motion and then motion under the skin of the air and stood in front of the light as if soaking. The graft under my fingers settled. My stapler felt normal metal again. We worked, fast and quiet, and pretending we were not doing what we were doing, luring something to a toy so it would not eat. Afterward, in the scrub sink, I looked at my hands like a believer does after the miracle refuses to leave scars. My knuckles were pinker than they should be. The hair on my forearms had curled and crisped. I could smell iron, and not from blood. That night the dream came not with the orb but with the unit. Room 713 this time, the older man with the river bench legs. The silhouette stood on the other side of the glass with its palms, if it had palms, flat against the pane, and the glass did not crack and did not melt, but shivered like a lake in a wind you cannot see. I reached up in the dream and put my palm opposite it because we are idiots. Heat through the glass like a griddle. When I woke, my hand was red. "I think it sees through seeing," I told Harper, who had entrusted me with too much heroism and kept finding me human. "If you look at it, it looks back. If you cover your eyes, it loses interest. If you give it a light, it treats it like company. Like a child," he said, and then, less ready to be a person, like a god. "Don't," I said, and went to rounds. The unit learned without me. Nurses turned away when the air at 311 hiccuped hot. Respiratory aimed their own lights into corners. Security shut off the cameras not out of compliance, but because the feeds had started to show only white where people were. We learned that it could come through windows even with blinds drawn. Heat is a rumor without scruples, and that it mostly loved glass. The ore with its bright-bladed lamps, the polished steel of a Mayo stand, the portal of an anesthesia machine, the little glass panes in the doors. It liked mirrors best. We had none left on the 7th floor, thank God. It took me longer than it should have to realize the shape we saw in reflections matched the height and build of our first patient. Not that it was him, but that the world uses the first thing it gets when it is choosing a face. We half joked and then didn't joke. The saint of room 19, all white heat and waiting. We told stories at 3 a.m. like people do when a place becomes a village. The thing about villages is that grief gets domesticated. You forget it's a wild animal until it takes something right in front of you. We lost a woman on a Friday. We should have lost her 3 times, to septic shock, to aspiration, to kidneys tired of our poisons. We'd kept her because sometimes medicine is arrogant and right. The silhouette brightened at her window at 311, and we set the lights in the hallway blazing like daylight. It turned its white head to the flood and stood there politely while she breathed her machine breath, and then, my fellow swears he saw this, and I believe him, it turned back. I cannot give you the motion because it had none. It was a change in attention. The skin along her clavicles reddened, then blanched. Her temperature sensor read 106.9 degrees Fahrenheit. She had no pulse we could use. We did what people do when there's nothing left but virtue compressions that cook your own arms, epinephrine that feels like lying. She died without the courtesy of a reason we could write in a chart. I went home and stood in the shower until the water cooled and kept going because I needed to know if ordinary heat could apologize. It could not. The last dream is the one I wouldn't tell the psychiatrist if I let him get me in a room. Or 7, of course. Silhouette at the head of the table, of course. A patient on the table, but not draped. The patient was me. The gown clipped beneath my arms, the chest that has hair only on the left because scars from childhood on the right took the follicle's will. The silhouette bent as if to speak, and the air throbbed. In the dream, in or light, a voice, no air and all heat said, "I saw you." Not past tense, not conditional. Fact. I woke with my palms burning and an urge to walk into my hospital at 3 a.m. like a man looking for confession. I did. I put on scrubs in the locker room and didn't tie my hair back because I wanted to feel it if it crisped. I left my phone in the locker because I did not want the thing to have a lens. I took a bear hugger hose in one hand and a portable or light in the other and walked down the glazed corridor that smells like chlorhexidine and coffee even at midnight. I went into or 7. I stood at the foot of the table without turning the room lights on. I lifted the light in my hand and turned it on. When the silhouette arrived, it did not enter. It occurred. The temperature lifted as gently as yeast rises. The steel instruments twitched in their sterile wraps. The light in my hand grew hot enough to ache. I said, "To the empty room which is the opposite of empty, I see you." It moved no movement, and then all of it placed closer. I felt heat like lightning without sound. The table under my hands grew as warm as a living person does right before you chill them on purpose. I put the light down on the floor. I turned toward the corner where the glass used to be before we draped it. I shut my eyes hard. Heat draped over me like a blanket. Not pain at first, then bite. The skin on my forearms curling, hairs coiling, that hot linen smell turned up loud. I kept my eyes shut and reached out with my left hand into the space where I felt it like weather. My palm found nothing and everything. A shape like a person and not a person. Think of a hot iron 2 inches from your skin. Now give it the idea of a chest and an arm. Now imagine it's pleased to have you near, because you are looking without looking. I said, louder because sometimes children like volume. You don't get to choose. It felt like telling fire it couldn't burn. But the brightness changed, felt it, didn't see it, and the temperature in the room eased like clouds passing. When I opened my eyes, nothing had moved. The stitched drape over the glass hung like a judge's robe. The temperature read 86 degrees Fahrenheit. The portable light on the floor had melted its own handle. My forearms blistered by morning. Small ones, 2nd degree, the sort we tell kids are like a bad sunburn and then hate ourselves. It felt like a fair trade I hadn't agreed to. I told no one what I had done. I told everyone what I thought we needed. Black cloth, fewer lenses, lights for offering when the unit hiccup taught. We made a ritual of it, which is another word for protocol. At 3:11, if you felt the air go white, you turned your back, you lifted a light, and you gave it something else to see. We kept losing and winning. The ratio felt like medicine on a good month. The newspapers called it a cluster and then stopped calling it anything because they couldn't print photographs that made sense. The city learned to close its blinds. The burn unit became a place people whispered about again, as if they hadn't known it had always needed quiet. Security replaced their cameras with blinks. The Your staff told a story about a surgeon who stood in the room at night and came out with small burns he refused to admit to. I let them have the myth. It belongs to them. The truth is smaller and meaner. I got tired of being a person and tried being Heat's friend. Sometimes, still, the dreams come. Sometimes the silhouette stands in or 7 like anyone who has waited too long for a surgeon to show, and behind it the doors crack and light pushes through like angry water. Sometimes it stands in a patient's doorway and places palms on the glass and counts to 60 while we count 2, offering it lights like offerings to a god. Sometimes it's nothing at all and I sleep. The last admission in this story is a woman from 2 floors below who sterilizes instruments for a living. She knows the temperature of things intimately and resents coincidence. She collapsed in the break room, burns in neat angles wherever countertops weren't. On her forearm there is an oval of spared skin in the shape of an instrument case she grabbed without knowing why. In the trauma bay she said it like saying grace. It saw me. We nodded because we knew the prayer. We took her up. We turned the unit to summer. We hung the drapes and warmed the saline and lifted lights when the hour arrived. I am a surgeon. I write my notes like affidavits. I believe in urine outputs, not God's. Here are the facts I consign my name to. Our city had a cluster of thermal injuries with no flame, no fuel, no smoke, a pattern that respected shadows, and a time of night when something invisible happened in a room. If we matched its attention with our offering, we could sometimes keep a person whole. If we stared, it stared back, and the room remembered the furnace. Everyone said the same words because sometimes there is only one sentence big enough to hold a fear. I dreamed of a white-hot silhouette standing in an operating theater, waiting. I still do. The air smells like warmed chlorhexidine and coffee and iron on bad days. Some nights I stand in the threshold and listen to the air. If it changes, if it bends toward heat, I turn away and lift a light and say, softly because I am a coward and a scientist and a person who learned one trick too late, I see you, and wait for the room to decide whether it will be kind.